What if every message you send tonight is quietly read by a machine before it ever reaches the person you sent it to? Somewhere in Brussels, a new law has just been approved that could change the internet as you know it forever. It touches your private chats, your emails, your photos, and even the voice notes you send to your closest friends. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what this law does, why millions of people are furious about it, and what it means for your own privacy starting right now. Before we go further, if you care about privacy, technology, and the hidden battles being fought over your data, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel breaks down exactly these kinds of stories every single week. This is not a small regulatory footnote buried in some government website. This is one of the most controversial digital laws Europe has ever passed, and almost nobody outside the tech world is talking about it yet. Stay with me until the end, because the last part of this video explains something that could directly affect you, even if you do not live in Europe. Let's get into it. The law is known informally as chat control, and it has just been approved by the European Union after years of fierce debate. At its core, this regulation requires tech companies operating in Europe to scan private messages and emails to detect child sexual abuse material before it spreads online. The stated goal is simple and, on the surface, impossible to argue with. Protect children from predators who use digital platforms to share and distribute abusive content. But the method the EU has chosen to achieve that goal is where the entire controversy begins. To understand why this is such a big deal, you need to understand how private messaging has worked until now. Apps like WhatsApp, Signal, and iMessage use something called end-to-end encryption, which means that only the sender and the receiver can read a message, not even the company running the app. This encryption is the digital equivalent of a locked letter that only two people hold the key to. Under the new chat control regulation, platforms may be required to scan content before it gets encrypted, which critics say effectively breaks that lock for everyone, not just criminals. This is where the real argument begins, because there are two completely different ways to see this law. On one side, child safety organizations argue that the current system allows predators to operate with almost total anonymity, hiding behind encryption while sharing horrific material undetected. Law enforcement agencies across Europe have pushed hard for these powers, insisting that encrypted platforms have become a safe haven for exactly the kind of crime this law is designed to stop. From this perspective, scanning is not surveillance. It is a targeted tool aimed only at catching abusers. On the other side of this debate are privacy advocates, security researchers, and even some of the encrypted messaging companies themselves, who say this law creates a dangerous precedent. Their argument is that any scanning system built into an encrypted app is effectively a backdoor, and backdoors do not stay limited to their original purpose. Once a scanning mechanism exists inside your phone, they argue, it can theoretically be expanded, misused, or hacked by people with far worse intentions than protecting children. Signal, one of the most trusted encrypted messaging apps in the world, has previously said it would rather leave the European market entirely than compromise its encryption. Let's talk about how this would actually work in practice, because this is where things get technically fascinating and genuinely unsettling. The proposed scanning would use something called client-side scanning, meaning the analysis happens directly on your device before your message gets encrypted and sent. Your phone would essentially compare parts of your message or image against a database of known illegal material using an algorithm. If the system detects a match, or in some proposals even a suspicious pattern, it could flag that content for human review, all without your knowledge in the moment it happens. Now here is the part that has technology experts sounding real alarms. These detection systems are not perfect, and false positives are a well-documented problem with this kind of automated scanning technology. A private photo of your own child in the bathtub, a medical image shared with a doctor, or even innocent memes could theoretically trigger a false flag depending on how the algorithm is trained. Imagine a system built to protect children, instead flagging normal family photos and having them reviewed by a stranger somewhere in a content moderation queue. The scale of what is being proposed is honestly staggering when you think about it. This regulation does not just apply to a few major platforms, it applies broadly across tech companies operating in the European Union, covering messaging apps, email providers, and cloud storage services. That means potentially hundreds of millions of users across an entire continent having their private communications subject to some form of automated scanning. Never before in the history of the Internet has a democratic government mandated this level of access to private digital communication at this scale. Supporters of the law argue that Europe already has precedent for scanning under previous voluntary systems used by companies like Google and Meta before strict encryption became standard practice. They point to statistics showing that reports of child abuse material dropped significantly after some platforms strengthened their encryption, suggesting that predators simply moved to darker corners of the Internet where detection became harder. From this viewpoint, chat control is not creating a new surveillance state. It is closing a gap that criminals have been exploiting for years. This is the strongest argument in favor of the regulation, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But critics respond with an equally serious concern about mission creep, a term used to describe how surveillance powers granted for one purpose tend to expand over time. They point to examples throughout history where tools built for national security or child protection eventually got used for unrelated government purposes, like tracking political dissidents or journalists. Once the technical infrastructure for mass scanning exists inside your phone, changing what that infrastructure searches for becomes a policy decision rather than a technical barrier. This is why civil liberties groups across Europe have been protesting this law for years, calling it one step away from a surveillance system that could outlast its original intention. There is also a geopolitical angle to this story that most people are missing entirely. As the EU tightens its grip on digital privacy through laws like this one, it simultaneously positions itself as the global leader in tech regulation, following the same pattern it used with GDPR years earlier. Because many major tech companies operate globally rather than building separate versions of their apps for each region, decisions made in Brussels often end up shaping how these platforms function everywhere, not just in Europe. This means that even if you live in the United States, India, or anywhere else in the world, the technical standards being forced onto companies by this law could eventually influence the version of the app installed on your own phone. Some companies have already signaled how they plan to respond to this new reality. A handful of encrypted app makers have publicly stated they are exploring ways to geographically restrict certain features rather than compromise their global encryption standards. Others may choose to comply fully, building region-specific versions of their software that scan messages only for users physically located within the EU. Either path creates a strange and fragmented future for the Internet, where your basic right to private communication depends entirely on which country you happen to be standing in. It is worth pausing here to acknowledge just how difficult this specific problem actually is, because there genuinely may not be a perfect answer. Protecting children from exploitation is not a controversial goal, and anyone arguing against this law is not arguing that child abuse material should be allowed to spread freely online. The real disagreement is about whether breaking encryption for everyone is an acceptable price to pay for catching a smaller number of criminals. Reasonable, well-intentioned people, including actual child safety experts, sit on both sides of this exact question, and that tension is precisely why this debate refuses to die down. Legal challenges against chat control are already being prepared by privacy organizations, and many analysts expect this regulation to end up in front of European courts within the next year or two. Previous EU privacy laws have faced similar legal battles, and some provisions have been struck down or significantly modified after judges ruled they went too far. This means the version of chat control we are discussing today may not be the final version that actually gets implemented across the continent. Whatever happens next will likely set a legal precedent that other governments around the world will study closely before attempting anything similar. So where does this leave you, the person watching this video right now, on your own phone or laptop? If you use encrypted messaging apps regularly, it is worth paying attention to how your favorite platforms respond to this regulation over the coming months. Some experts recommend keeping an eye on official statements from companies like Signal, WhatsApp, and Apple, since their reactions will reveal a lot about how seriously this law will actually be enforced. This story is still unfolding in real time, and what feels like a European issue today could easily become a global standard within just a few years. Technology and privacy laws rarely make headlines the way celebrity gossip or sports scores do, but decisions like this one quietly reshape the world we all live in. The internet you use tomorrow is being decided today, in rooms full of lawmakers, lobbyists, and engineers who understand exactly how much power this kind of legislation actually holds. Whether you see chat control as a necessary shield for vulnerable children or a dangerous crack in the wall of digital privacy, one thing is certain. This will not be the last time we talk about where the line between safety and surveillance truly belongs. If this video helped you understand a story that mainstream news barely covered, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment telling me which side of this debate you land on, and I will see you in the next video.